All right. I'm terribly sorry to have to interrupt your lunch, but you're stuck with me for the next 5 minutes. I want to thank everybody for making it here. I'm truly pleased to see everyone gathered here today for such an important cause. My wife Jordan and I are definitely honored to join you. Like it is for you, family is by far the most important thing in our lives, and our children bring the greatest joy. And I'm extremely lucky to have 5 children. Just this month, Jordan and I welcome our 5th child, Savannah, and she was born in Kansas City. As all parents, we do everything we can to protect our kids, and we hope that every child needs to feel safe. As you know, we moved to Kansas City over 8 months ago, and they have been some busy but very special 8 months. I must admit that at the beginning we were quite overwhelmed by the amount of invitations and considerations that people ask you to join certain organizations and causes. At the same time, when we moved our family, we just found out Jordan was pregnant. We needed to find a place to live, get the girls in school, and of course, I had to learn how to run a sprint. So Jordan and I agreed that for the first few months, we were not going to be part of any of the great organizations we were asked to become part of. But then I had the chance to meet Peter, and he started talking to me about MOCSA. And I couldn't help myself and just break that rule. I told Peter that I was in without asking Jordan, and then when I got home, I told Jordan, hey, we're going to be co-chairs of MOCSA. She immediately got a little upset. And then I said, relax, wait till we meet the people at MOCSA, and you will understand what I'm talking about. So we had a chance to meet Peter's wife, Michelle, and then meet Julie from MOCSA. And once she understood what MOCSA was all about, then she was definitely all in. It was impossible not to be part of such an important organization when you're a father of 5. This is such a noble cause, especially to anyone who has children, that rape or sexual abuse is a parent's worst nightmare. And we all pray that it never happens to us, but unfortunately, the odds are against us, and it is going to happen to one of us, or to one of our relatives, or to one of our friends, or to one of their kids. And I feel that it's our obligation to contribute to organizations like MOCSA that will make the healing process so much better. I have a philosophy in life, and that's one of continuous improvement. And for those who know or work for me or work with me, or those who partners our sprint, I tell everyone that we all have to get better every day in everything that we do. That means that everything that we do today has to be better than yesterday, and so on. So when I took the responsibility to be the co-chair of MOCSA, I told Peter that we sure had to perform better than last year, and that we had to beat the budget and shatter last year's in the amount of money that we could get. Now, it wasn't hard to raise money because there's 2 basic reasons. One is that once that you hear the brutal statistics that you just heard, and that I'm going to share with you again, it's easy for people to want to contribute. I didn't know that 1 in every 4 girls and 1 in every 6 boys is going to be sexually abused before the age of 18. That's brutal. 1 in 6 women will be the victim of a complete or attempted rape. Only 16 to 20% of rapes are reported. Most people just keep it to themselves. More than 80% of sexual violence is committed by someone that the victim knows, not a stranger. And children and women in the age of 15 to 25, and especially those who have disabilities, are the most frequent victims of sexual violence. Rape and sexual abuse will happen no matter what, and something that we cannot ignore. But what cannot happen is for these crimes to go and remain in obscurity. Rape victims need to know that there are amazing organizations around the world and in Kansas City, organizations like MOCSA, that will help victims in the difficult and often traumatic period, the healing period. And the more I learn about MOCSA, the more determined I am to help. Second, it's easy to raise money in Kansas City. There are so many generous people here willing to help and contribute to such a special cause. Kansas City is a special place, a place where family and community comes first. And the fact that we're all here says it all. But also at Sprint, we're lucky to have a lot of generous people, and I'm lucky that Sprint has so many great partners. We reach out to almost all of them, and all of them have contributed. A special thanks to Debbie from my team, Debbie Ballard, at Sprint, who worked relentlessly in helping me achieve this great goal. All of your generosity has allowed us to raise, before the start of the event, over $600,000. And what's amazing is that this room was never set up for so many people. We have over 1,270 people here. So on behalf of MOCSA, on behalf of Jordan, myself, my other co-chairs, a huge thanks to all of you for your generosity and contribution. Kansas City is blessed to have MOCSA, and Jordan and I strongly believe in its mission to prevent sexual violence and improve the lives of those affected by sexual abuse and assault. None of this would be possible without the dedication of so many. I want to personally thank all the volunteers who are on call at all hours to assist and comfort someone who experiences an attack, and others who help educate about this very sensitive subject. You're about to watch a very powerful video. It highlights the service from MOCSA that offers to children who have survived sexual abuse. Though we love to shield all children from abuse, pain, and fear, we're grateful that MOCSA is prepared to help. Creative treatment, such as art and play therapy, give children a safe way to express their feelings. They learn to trust the wonderful groups of people who will listen to them, believe them, and be there for them. Thanks to all of you for supporting MOCSA today. I hope all of you will tell others about the vital work that it does. This is an amazing organization that is making a difference in the life of our children, and I'm very proud to be part of it. Thank you.
Here comes the sun, here comes the sun, and I say it's alright. Little darling, it's been a long, cold, lonely winter. Little darling, it feels like years since it's been here. Sun, and I say it's alright. Little darling, the smiles returning to their faces. Little darling, it seems like years since it's been here.
Well, good afternoon. 1,270 what, Marcelo? 79 or something? It's unbelievable. I've been to the MOCSA lunch for many, many, many years, and today is as special as any of them. And when we get to hear from our guest speaker in just a minute, I think you're going to be incredibly moved. But we do thank you for watching the video. It's incredibly powerful, and it reminds me of what MOCSA does for young people in Kansas City. You know, it's unfortunate in some ways that we have to have a MOCSA, but if you're going to have it, you better have the best one in the country. And we have the very, very best MOCSA, a MOCSA-like organization in the country. And it's because of this community that it exists. Julie does a great job. Polly Ruinger, who was the previous executive director, is here at my table today. But it's because of all of you that MOCSA exists in our community. I got to tell you, my wife and I are incredibly proud and happy to be serving as honorary co-chairs this year alongside Marcelo and Jordan. They've become great friends in a very, very short time. And I, too, remember that meeting, Marcelo, where we sat down at the Sprint campus and I said, let me tell you a little bit about this organization called MOCSA. And he said, no, you don't understand. I need a couple of months before I get involved. And it's just like he told the story. He listened, and then we brought Julie out and June Ann, and he said, you know what, I'm in. And Jordan, thank you for not kicking him out of the house when he went home and told you that he was going to be all in with us. You know, you got a chance to hear Marcelo just a few minutes ago, some of you for the first time. I got to tell you, we are so lucky he's here in Kansas City along with his wonderful family, and we are so lucky he's running Sprint. So let's give him another round of applause and his whole family. Welcome. Welcome. You know, now Michelle and I have been involved with MOCSA for many, many years, with Michelle recently finishing up a term on the board of directors. Our company, UMB, has also had a very long history of partnering and supporting MOCSA and MOCSA's mission. It's an organization that has meant so much to us personally and to this great community. And even after years of involvement, I must tell you, we continue to be amazed when we hear the stories of those who are survivors and be inspired by each and every one of the volunteers and the staff members at MOCSA. You know, this happens to young people, to old people, to boys, to girls. Pretty much no one is immune from the challenges that MOCSA responds to, and they do, again, such an extraordinary job. Now, as many of you know, this is somewhat personal for us too. Michelle and I have 2 daughters in college. Unfortunately, sexual assault is just far too common on college campuses in America today. And when I hear that 1 in 5 women who are sexually assaulted will be done so in college, I immediately think of our 2 daughters, one in Boston and one down in Miami. Just like the statistics of how many girls and boys are sexually abused in childhood, that number is obviously way, way, way too high. MOCSA and all of us here in the room supporting this event are helping to change that, even though we never hope that we have to use their services. MOCSA is always there, day, night, weekends, holidays, it doesn't matter. Unfortunately, time knows no boundaries on these things, and when they happen, MOCSA is there to respond. Today, of course, is our biggest fundraiser of the year. MOCSA needs us today to dig a little deeper in our pockets if we can, and even help more than we already have by our presence here today. Your contributions will continue this vital work. As many of you know, MOCSA provides hospital advocacy to victims of sexual violence in the immediate aftermath of an assault. More than 700 times last year, advocates were called to area emergency rooms at all times of the day and night to be of service. That averages out to almost 2 times a day. Think about that. Twice today, MOCSA folks will be out helping people in need in our community. That to me is just incredible that as we sit here right now, a MOCSA volunteer may be on their way to an emergency room or a hospital to help someone in need. Now, our keynote speaker today, Lara Logan, knows exactly how shaky the world can feel after surviving sexual violence. Lara was already an internationally respected reporter when her world was literally turned upside down by a sexual assault that she endured while on assignment in Egypt. Before we welcome Lara to the stage and hear her inspiring story of courage and survival, may I direct your attention one more time to the video screens for a brief introduction. Thank you.
Better in jail.
Yep, different dynamic. Driving right to the top.
It was the moment the enemy seemed to be waiting for.
There you go.
At this point, our gunner is, the most important weapon on that vehicle because he's the one putting down suppressive fire. It was mayhem inside that vehicle. Captain Hintz felt lucky to be alive. His soldiers were relieved. This is the single greatest honor that the military can bestow on its own. That's pretty good for a mediocre soldier.
Think how good the great soldiers are.
Welcome aboard.
How many shipwrecks do you think are down there?
Hundreds, if not thousands. Got it.
The most obvious thing when you look at these walls is that it's all men.
Yes.
In lots of the things that you've done, you've been the first woman. Does it matter to you? Is it important?
Well, what matters to me is that I'm not the last one.
Were they like this before you started climbing?
I don't think they were quite this big before I started climbing. I honestly think my connective tissue and stuff has they're just all just gotten beefier, you know.
What was your biggest win ever on a single bet?
Last year's Super Bowl, and I bet $3.5 million on New Orleans.
Wow. Humans share more than 98% of the same DNA with chimpanzees. What we know of them is mostly because of one woman, Jane Goodall. Did you have any limits? Was there anything you wouldn't do?
I didn't like singing at weddings.
But you did it.
I did it, yeah, I did.
And actually, as it turns out...
As it turns out, it's the one thing I did where everyone in the world goes like, oh, you're the wedding singer that made it.
On the day of the September 11th attacks, Ali Soufan was thousands of miles away from Ground Zero. At this point, every fiber of your being is screaming, I've got to get back to
Yeah,
Neil.
that's exactly what I said. I felt, what did we miss?
Is that why it's hard for you to go to Ground Zero?
I don't know.
And I'm screaming, thinking, if I scream, if they know, they're going to stop. You know, someone's going to stop them, or they're going to stop themselves because this is wrong. And it was the opposite. This is the more I screamed, it turned them into a frenzy. I think there are a lot of women who experience these kind of things as journalists, and they don't want it to stop them from doing their job because they do it for the same reasons as me. They're committed to what they do. They're not adrenaline junkies. You know, they're not glory hounds. They do it because they believe in being journalists.
Hello, everybody. Can you please all turn off your Sprint phones? Thank you very much for having me here and for giving me the opportunity to be part of this organization just for a moment. You know, after listening to everybody and watching that video, it kind of takes your breath away. And it's, you know, as a mom, wow, Marcelo, I understand what you said. To think of a child being sexually assaulted or abused or raped in any way is so painful, actually. It's kind of unbearable. So anyone who can do something to be there for people in need in that situation is doing a great thing. And I am grateful to everybody who came here today to support MOCSA and to listen to me. You know, I don't plan these speeches. I do them only if I really want to, if I feel passionately, deeply that this is important to me. And that was how I felt about being here today. So, you know, I thought I like to come to a place and meet the people and absorb everything and learn about them before I think about what it is I want to talk about and what I think is important. And so when I thought about how to begin today, I thought the simplest way is to just begin with the truth. You know, I was gang raped by a mob of 200 to 300 men for over 40 minutes. And definitely those 40 minutes were amongst the most difficult in my life. But I don't regret them. And I wouldn't be a whole person. I kind of like the person I am. Not perfect, obviously, I have a long way to go in certain areas. But I'm okay with the person that I am. And I want to tell you a little bit about how I got to that point. When we were in Tahrir Square, you saw a little bit of the video. That literally is the video of me in, you know, the minutes and the moments before everything changed. And I had been in Egypt a week before that. I had been up in Alexandria on the coast, which is a very interesting place because it's the heart of the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt. And that philosophy is the basis, one of the most profound influences in the formation of groups like Al-Qaeda. So, you know, much of what we live in many different ways today has come from that place. The rendition ships, which Mubarak used to dock there when he was doing the interrogations and extraordinary renditions and torture on behalf of the United States government, those docked in the port of Alexandria. So, very interesting place to be as a journalist in a very critical time. And when we drove to Cairo, we were stopped on the outskirts of Cairo, and we ended up having a very difficult night in an Egyptian prison. And I was very, very sick. had dehydrated, and they forced medicine down my throat and stuck a dirty needle in my arm, and I passed out unconscious. And when I woke up, my team was with me, and we were allowed to leave. So those were the circumstances under which I flew home. And 1 week later, I flew back because Mubarak was stepping down. I knew he was going to step down. It was obvious to anyone watching the situation. And I believed that that was a very profoundly important story. And the night we arrived, 10 minutes after we landed in the airport, people started to talk about it. He had quit. Mubarak had made his announcement. So we were in a rush to get to Tahrir Square, which everyone had been watching Tahrir Square for the last few weeks. It was on all the news programs. And if you may recall that there were protesters who were families living in the square, in tents. And that became a very critical part of this for me later. And we were talking to people, and I remember meeting this one family and the children spending a long time with them. They wanted me to meet their mother. And when I met their mother, she was in an abaya, wearing a black abaya, with only a slit for her eyes. And I looked at my young Egyptian translator, who's a fixer, who was helping us with the story, and I said, oh, I see that. Liberation for Egypt doesn't mean liberation for Egypt's women just yet. And he said, I'm not going to translate that. Anyway, it was not long afterwards when we were in the crowd, and my cameraman, Richard Butler, his light on his camera went out. And so my producer, Max McClellan, was there, and this had been a jubilant atmosphere in the square. Everyone was talking about Facebook and the Facebook revolution, and thank you, America, thank you, Mark Zuckerberg. And it was, I've often said that it was like being at a party after the Super Bowl, and that was the feeling. And part of how you stay alive in these places is paying attention to your environment and picking up, not missing the cues. And really, there were no cues for us that night. There was just no sign of what was coming until that young fixer looked at me. He just, I think he grabbed me, I can't remember exactly, but I just remember his face and his voice. And he said, Lara, we have got to get out of here. We have got to get out of here. And it was panic, but real fear, real panic. And I didn't argue. I didn't know why, but I just, I didn't stop to question him. It was so obvious. And we took off running. And immediately, the crowd closed around me. And of course, what I did not know, because I didn't speak Arabic, was that he had heard them saying, let's take her pants off, let's do this, let's do that. And he knew that we were in real trouble, that I was in real trouble, particularly. And as we ran, this crowd that closed around us, I thought at first that they were trying to help, because they kept saying, it's okay, come with us, and this kind of thing. And I knew that, journalists had been attacked in the last few days in the square, and that people in the crowd had protected them and helped them. And that was the initial assumption. But, a lot of things were happening at the same time, and one of the first things that started happening was that people were grabbing my body and grabbing my breasts and, putting their hands between my legs and groping me everywhere. And it escalated very, very, very quickly. So there's a lot of things, you're running, you're trying to work out what's going on, you're at first thinking, what's going on? And you're trying to stop them, and you're trying to take their hands away. And it very quickly became apparent that the mob around me was assaulting me sexually. And even thinking about it today, it's still pretty hard to believe. But it became overwhelming because I just couldn't. Every hand that I tried to tear off my body, there was another one. And when there's 200 to 300 men, there's really nothing that you can do. And I still am amazed that in that moment, I the humiliation was as palpable as the fear. That you're not spared the humiliation just because you're fighting for your life. And I was just amazed at how persistent and violent they were. And it, you know, they tore my clothes to shreds. And I remember very clearly because I was wearing, you know, pants from Old Navy, which I apologize, but for 10 years I've been wearing them on 60 Minutes. And I had my boots, you know, I always wear good boots because I learned from other journalists that the first thing a soldier looks at when you show up in his battle zone is what you got on your feet, because he wants to know that you know how to move when he needs you to move. So I always have good boots on, and I had a shirt and a sweater and a jacket, and so tearing all these clothes took a lot of force. And I never forget the feeling of the air that night, the cold air on my skin, knowing then that I was naked, feeling my bra snap, feeling my necklace snap, feeling them just, if they could have shredded my body the way they shredded my clothes, they would have. And you know, the first at least 20 minutes or so, I spent fighting the sexual assault. And then eventually I realized, you know, they were inside every part of my body. And I was naked. And there was nothing more, I mean, sexually, there was nothing more they could do. You know, I was being raped and assaulted by more men than I could ever fight. And I actually was now, at this point, struggling to breathe. And my joints were distended. They were pulling, you know, my body, tearing at my body like, I mean, I was like a rag doll. For some time afterwards, I had hand marks from where they tried to literally rip my breasts from my body. They were trying to scalp me, by not pull out my hair, but literally trying to tear my scalp off my head. And I had one person left with me, Ray Jackson, our security person, and I was holding on to Ray's shirt, and he kept telling me, Lara, don't let go, don't let go. If you let go, you're gonna die. And every time I went down on the ground, I could hear Ray's voice saying, Lara, get up. If you don't get up, you have to stay on your feet to stay alive. You have to get up. And I kept, you know, fighting to get up and fighting to hold on to him. And at one point, you know, these men were so close to me that I remember I just reached forward and bit one of them on the face. And I could look in their eyes while they were assaulting me. It's a pretty profound thing to be that close to people and have them show you no mercy, none. You're nothing to them in that moment. So when I eventually, they tore Ray off me, I couldn't hold onto him any longer. I was convinced at that point that that was the moment I just felt all the strength leave my body, and the adrenaline just abandoned me. And I was looking at my reality. And I'm a person who always tries to be very honest with myself, even about the things I don't really want to face. And although I kind of always had in the back of my mind that I was a Charlie's Angel, and you know, when the shit hit the fan, I was going to be able to somehow pull the trick out of a hat and save myself and kill them all and, you know, leave a room full of bodies as I sailed off into the sunset. And the reality when you're in that situation is, you know, that a mob, you can't do anything against a mob. They have all the power and you have none. So I knew by this time there was, you know, the physical impact on my body was overwhelming. And I was already dying. There was no doubt in my mind. I mean, every breath was so difficult and took so long that I had very little doubt that I had minutes left, if that. And I just stopped fighting. I mean, I felt that adrenaline go, and I was like, This is it. This is how I'm going to die. And it's a miserable, filthy death. Dirty. I mean, I felt so dirty. It was disgusting to have those men inside every part of my body. And my next thought, as fast as I thought that, my next thought was of my children at home, my 10-month-old baby girl, Lola, and my son, who had just turned 2. And, my next thought was, how could you do that to them? How could you just give up? How could you stop fighting? And I then fought for my life, not because I believed that I could survive, but because I wanted my children, when they learned about this, when they were old enough to know that I died fighting. I was like, the one thing I can claim, that little bit that I can take back for myself, is some shred of nobility in my death. And really that's what I fought for to the end. And Tahrir Square is not a square like that. It has roads running through it. It has ditches and drains and fences, and the mob is hysterical. And none of this is calm. So they're dragging you, and they're trying to, and you're going down, and you're fighting to get up, and you're dragging and moving, and at one point they had me on the floor in a tent, and then they dragged me back onto my feet. And the last time I went down, I couldn't get back up. That was it. And I was so heavy on my legs, I don't even know what it was. They were beating us. Ray was saying they're beating us with sticks, they're stealing our passports, they're doing this, they're doing that. Honestly, I don't even remember being beaten. I have no memory of that at all, because my memory was the sexual assault part and then the struggle to breathe. And eventually, I was dragged into a part of the square where they were trapped between a group of Egyptian women and children and the tents. And that was what stopped the mob for a moment. And I said, it was interpreted in the beginning that I was saved by these women. The women did what they could, but they were sitting on the ground, and this naked woman came flying out of nowhere and suddenly was on top of them. I mean, that's what it was really like. And this woman had 2 children. I mean, I still remember their faces. And so the mob, really I landed in the middle of these women and children. And the mob, that sort of stopped for a moment, it gives them pause, but they're fighting to get at you, and now there are Egyptian men who are trying to push them back to keep them away from their women and children. And I don't really know how much of that was to keep them away from me. And it took me a long time to really understand that that moment when I lost Ray was actually the moment that at the time I thought, this is it, now I'm going to die. But actually, Ray being able to fight his way through the crowd to the Egyptian military and to get the soldiers to come to try to help me was probably what saved my life. The combination of things. And as I was lying there, the women were pouring water on me, and the mob was still so close. So once I could start to breathe again, it's a fear that is very difficult to describe. And I knew that literally they could just reach out and drag me back in. They were that close. And I kept saying, army, army, army. And I remember even thinking, God, do I have the one Egyptian woman who doesn't speak English and know what army is? Because she's looking at me. And they're throwing pieces of clothing at me. Things are hitting me. And then eventually this soldier with a baton fights his way through the crowd. And I see him. And he turns away and disappears. And this goes on still. And I'm just screaming because now I'm thinking I have a chance. And I'm so terrified they're going to take this chance away from me. And he comes back, the soldier, and he's got an abaya. And they put the abaya over me, the traditional black robes. And then they pick me up. And I realized they didn't want to touch me when I was naked. And he carried me to the edge of the square where my Egyptian driver was waiting, and he took me in his arms, and we went up an alleyway, and my team was there, and my producer, Max, was just knelt at my feet, and I kept saying to him, you can't imagine what they did to me. And he just kept saying, I'm so sorry, I'm so sorry. And eventually we persuaded the Egyptian military to drive us to our hotel, a young Egyptian fixer. There wasn't room for him in the back of this tiny little vehicle. And so they started to take off without him, and he just started vomiting under the ground. And I was screaming hysterically. So they stopped, we just dragged him in, and he lay on us to get to the hotel. I had an Egyptian doctor come to my room, and he didn't want me to talk. All I wanted to do was to tell people what had happened to me. I wanted people to understand. I needed people to understand, and no one could look at me. I mean, these guys who, we would literally die for each other. Max, Richard, Jeff, we have worked together from Iraq to Afghanistan to Darfur, to Ebola, the worst of circumstances, the best of circumstances. These are great people who mean everything to me, and they couldn't look at me. And I remember Jeff, one of my other producers, had not been with us, and he walked into my hotel room, and the phone was ringing, and it was the spokesperson from the communications person from the US Embassy, and I heard him say to her, no, she's fine, she's fine. And I remember thinking, what are you talking about? Because my legs are not broken, because I don't have to be rushed into surgery, that I'm fine? I'm not fine. There's nothing about me that's fine. And at the same time, my other producer got a call from my boss, and they were starting to talk about the story and how they were still going to meet the deadline and get the story done. And I was like, I realized in that moment that no one had any idea what had just happened to me. They knew it was bad. They knew I was naked. They knew it was sexual, but nobody understood. And they wanted to not violate, make me feel even more violated. So they couldn't even look at me, which made me feel ignored and overlooked and invisible. And the doctor said, you're lucky to be alive. Stop talking. You're lucky to be alive. You shouldn't even be alive. And eventually he just stabbed me with an injection, and I passed out because he wanted me to be quiet that much. But before that happened, when Max was having this conversation, I said, he hung up, and I said, Max, I need you to do something. Clear the room, get rid of everybody, and get my husband on the phone. And my husband, I had called him from the square, and he said it was like an animal making noises on the end of the phone. He couldn't make sense of one word. He had no idea. You imagine he's home in Washington and he picks up his phone, and there's literally just guttural animal sounds on the end of the phone. But I knew that he could handle it. And I got him on the phone, and I said, Joe, I want you to do something for me. I want you to listen. I'm going to tell you what they did to me. I'm going to tell you everything they did to me. And when you're done, I want you to take notes, hang up the phone, and call my boss and tell him what they did to me. Because without even thinking about why, I knew how important it was that the facts be the facts. And my husband did exactly that. He also made Max that night. He made Max take photographs of the bruises and the tear marks and the injuries all over my body. And Max was like, man, I do not want to do this. I really do not want to do this. And my husband said to him, you have to do this for her because she needs proof. And you have to think like a doctor. So I had to take my clothes off and be naked in front of someone that in a million years I would never be naked in front of. It was a total violation of our incredibly close friendship. And another difficult thing for me in that moment, but I completely understood how important it was, and I was happy to do it in a way. It wasn't fun, but I wanted to do it. It's a better way to put it. So we flew back to Washington the next day. My husband met me at the airport, and drove me to Sibley Hospital, where they had a team who does what, MOCSA and the people you work with, what they do. They had a sexual assault team waiting. She did a full examination and report, and I spent the next few days in the hospital. And while I was in hospital, CBS were going to put out their statement, and we had agreed on the words, said I was sexually assaulted in Tahrir Square. And, why sexually assaulted and not rape? Because really, I was raped. But because I was raped with sticks and hands and all these things, we didn't want to say, people didn't want to say raped. So that was fine. I don't care what you call it. I know what it was. And at the last minute, my boss called and said, we've run this up the flagpole, and CBS wants to just say that you were attacked and not say you were sexually assaulted. And there was no doubt in my mind. I was visceral in my reaction. I said, that is wrong. It's not true. It's factually incorrect. And I need you to do this. And he said, okay, put Joe on the phone. And my husband went out. When he came back in, he said, don't worry. He understands, he knows how important it is, and that's what they're going to do. And that's what CBS did. And if you wonder how, what's important in the recovery, those things are important in the recovery. It is years later, someone wrote about this attack and said I was groped on the streets in Egypt. And it's probably my dying wish to have that reporter gang raped by 300 men. And I would like him then to write about his experience and see if he describes it as being groped. But I realized, I had the President of the United States call me. My husband came up the stairs and he's like, there's a phone call for you. I was like, I don't want to talk to him. And he's like, it's the President. I was like, oh, okay, hand me the phone. But honestly, I didn't expect the outpouring of support that came in the wake of my attack. I've been on the other side of the media, and I know what that feels like, and I was braced for that. And what did I think people were going to say? I thought they were going to say it was my fault. I thought they were going to blame me. Max and I on the flight literally went through what I was wearing because we wanted to make sure that, when the photographs and the pictures that were out, that there could be nothing that people would say, well, for God's sake, she's in the Middle East. How could she be dressed like that? What does she expect? It's her own fault. So that is, in a small way, what I think many victims of sexual assault go through is there's always that very uncomfortable, weird dimension to this kind of experience where somehow it's the victim's fault. And that's, of course, I was 41 or something at the time that I was attacked, and I lived through The Accused. Who doesn't remember Jodie Foster's movie, right? Which was all about that it's not, even if you're wearing a mini skirt and flirting and getting drunk, it doesn't mean you want to be raped, doesn't mean you're asking to be raped. And I feel very fortunate for a number of reasons. One, because, as I said last night at the cocktail party, I had a lot already in me to help me overcome this. I can't imagine what a child reaches for. What do you reach for in that moment? How do you even make sense of it? And how do you not blame yourself? Because this is something nobody wants to talk to you about it. Even when I did that interview for 60 Minutes, which was the only interview I did at the time, and I could have done every news program, every news show, every magazine, every newspaper in America, they were beating them back. Okay, they were camped outside my door, and I didn't. Not because I don't want to be a spokesperson or because I don't want to stand up for the issue, but because I don't want to just be marginalized as the person who just, goes on about sexual assault. When I do it, I want it to come from a position of power and to reach all people. And that was very important to me. And when I did that interview, the sound man, Bert, who was a much older guy who'd been there forever, and he came to put the microphone on me, and I could see he was scared to touch me. So I said, oh my God, Bert. I said, you touched my breasts. And everyone started laughing. And I still do that to them. And it's funny, I talk about Egypt. Sometimes I talk about it, sometimes I don't. And I can see that it's very difficult for people. People lower their eyes. My guys lower their eyes when I talk about Egypt. They don't want to know about it. And, one of the things that I've learned is that in the beginning, I was so grateful to be alive. I mean, it's like living someone else's life. To see my children again, to be home, I mean, I thought that was gone. It wasn't just that I thought it was gone. I was almost dead when I was dragged into those women. And I was so grateful to have another chance to be there. I almost was, the first 2 weeks were almost in a weird way. I mean, of course, you're completely traumatized, but on the other side of that, I was elated. And one of the people who helped put me back together in that moment is a man called Faraz al-Ibrahim, Samurai al-Ibrahim, who is an Iraqi man who works for CBS, who's one of my closest friends in the entire world. And he brought me a necklace with my name written in Arabic on it. And I remember he got on a plane from Baghdad. He didn't even tell me. One of my best friends got on a plane from Australia. My sister got on a plane from South Africa. By the time I landed, my sister was already landing, and I never even spoke to her. So I had strong family support. I had the support of my company. I had support from people all over the United States and then all over the world. And I had people writing to me, a Libyan woman actually, who was raped at one of those checkpoints in Cairo, who had gone there on vacation, not having realized what was going on, and who was running through the streets in Cairo begging for help from people who were turning away from her. And eventually a couple picked her up, and she was asking to go to the hospital, and the hospital was closed because people forget how dangerous Cairo was at that time. And she eventually got dropped at the airport and had to beg people in the airport to collect money to get her on a flight. I mean, I can't imagine how much more difficult it was for her. And when she got home to Libya, she was actually living in Canada at the time, but all she could do was get a flight to Libya because Libya was cheaper. Her family told her not to talk about it. Be quiet, don't talk about it. And she's one of the women who, her story, was when at a certain point after this, I was like, okay, we're done, we're done sort of wallowing in your own self-pity here. It's time to get back up on your feet. And it took me a long time to realize that getting back up on your feet and getting over it doesn't mean you have to pretend it never happened. That's a tough thing because even at work, people wanted to pretend it never happened. No one wants to talk about it. No one wants to mention it. Someone very senior at CBS told me not to go to my second meeting with the FBI because it didn't matter. No one was ever going to be arrested. And I did. I canceled that meeting, and I regret it. And so what I say to people is there are many different stages in the path of your recovery. I meet people all the time who were raped 20, 30, 40 years ago and never talked about it. I meet people who never told their husbands that they were raped or never told their wives. As you said earlier, as was said here, that it's not just women who are raped and sexually assaulted. I got many letters from men who wrote to me because they had never been able to talk to anyone about it. Now they felt they could talk to me. And that's a great thing. I mean, I really feel like that's a gift. That's why I don't regret what happened, and I wouldn't change it. I'd make the same decisions again. I'd still go back to Egypt. I would still do it. I mean, so I know that my time is up. And I guess what I just want to say to you is this is something that you can't escape, because unless you're never going to have sex again for the rest of your life, there's always going to be a moment when you are reminded. And it's kind of a buzzkill to say to your husband, oh, shit, I just had a flashback to my gang rape. Can we put this on hold for a minute? Yeah. That's tricky. So sometimes you do it. Sometimes you feel okay and you do that and he understands. But, men always think no doesn't mean no anyway. I've spent my whole life trying to explain to them that no really does mean no. But there's this idea that, well, if you persist, we'll change our minds, right? That's the tough one for me, because it takes me back to that moment of trying to stop people and not being able to stop them. So that's a really tough one that I'm still working on. And I was diagnosed with arthritis in my right hand just over a week ago from the trauma that I sustained in the square holding onto Ray. And I have extensive internal health issues that have lingered. I've had chronic pain for 3.5 years. To some nights at 60 Minutes, I would crawl to the bathroom, work in there late at 2 in the morning. And I still would do it all again. I really would. But what I know is that for people who don't have the support, for people who don't have anybody, who don't have the President of the United States calling them, or a first-class ticket on British Airways from their company, you know, who don't have a husband who's capable of living through that and getting beyond it, they have MOCSA, and that's a great thing. That's a really great thing, because sexual assault victims only have their word. They very rarely have injuries that prove to the world the true horror of what they went through. And you're taking such an important, vital part of all of our lives, and you're casting it into shadow. And I can only imagine how difficult it is for a young girl or a young boy to want to have a sexual relationship with someone when they've been, you know, raped repeatedly by a family member. So I'm here because I really believe in this. And I've met so many really great people. This is a great organization. Sort of what an elegant luncheon that they've had today. And that video, you know, I was like, oh gosh, what are we going to see of children? I'm not sure I can do that. And instead, that video said so much about MOCSA and how they do what they do. Not just what they do, but how they do it. So I know times are always tough, but whatever you can, I would just urge you, dig deep and be there and stay the course and buy Sprint phones. We're all switching to Sprint. Everybody is switching to Sprint. And thank you for being here. Thank you for coming. Thank you for listening to me. I went way too long. I always do, but it means a lot.